Long before Blair Witch Project popularized the found footage genre, horror movies tried to make us frightened even more by claiming that a story was quote-unquote based on true events. That sort of thing really makes your imagination go wild, doesn't it? The mere idea of some of the horrors seen on screen actually having taken place in the real world. It makes the horror movie more realistic and in that, more likely to scare you. However, based on a true story rarely means that such a thing actually happened. More often than not, those true events are an inspiration for the story and have little to no connection with what we see on the screen. Some viewers are more skeptical and filmmakers seem to know that, so they don't rely on the based on the true story tag as often as they used to. The trend, however, is something new to video games, and developers are slowly starting to implement that to make the stories and the game worlds more grounded. Here are some fine examples of horror games based on true events. A horror game set in an abandoned insane asylum that might be a bit played out for some, but you should still give Town of Light a chance. Sure, it isn't perfect and revolutionary by any means, but the premise is quite promising. In this spooky first-person adventure game, we venture to a real insane asylum that operated in the late 18th and early 19th century in a real Italian town of Volterra. The setting is very authentic as the developers put much work into recreating the asylum itself. Through various retrospectives, we learn about the gruesome methods used back in the day to quote-unquote treat the mentally ill. What's more scary is that some of those pretty insane methods, like let's say shock therapy, were actually used back in the day. We play as a former patient of this nightmarish place and try to learn what happened to us and what brought us here in the first place. The unique narrative is also worth pointing out, as it blurs the line between reality and fiction, or in that case nightmare, as our heroine goes through dialogues both in first, second and third person. The game plays you as much as you play it, and while it's not the best horror out there, it's quite unique and unsettling, so give it a try.
What's going on?
Neverending Nightmares isn't actually based on real events, so to speak, but more on personal experiences of its creator. It's not like the developer was locked up in an abandoned house full of grisly monsters. The game serves as a rather horrific visualization of how battling depression looks like. Matt Gilgenbach, the man behind Neverending Nightmares, fell into depression after his previous game, Retrograde, failed to meet financial expectations. The game is in a way a metaphor of fighting your own personal demons. The minimalistic graphics, the black and white color scheme, it's all supposed to show you what the world looks like when you are depressed. The dreamlike aesthetics also play a big part in making the experience unsettling, as the game features many scenes we know from our own nightmares. Dying in a dream and then waking up, having your teeth fall out. The horror of Neverending Nightmares works so well because we can all relate to the game at some level or other. Another game on our list is Masochism, which is in many ways similar to Neverending Nightmares. It is also a psychological horror of sorts. We play a son of two sociopaths that experiences a vision of himself turning into a serial killer and starts hearing voices. What's more, his brother has already been locked up in an asylum for the exact same reason. The game features a character of a psychopathic killer, Greyman, also known as Albert Fish, who was a real-life killer and cannibal who killed and ate a certain woman because, well, and that's true, the voices of angels told him to.
In the end, the only thing I saw was a flash, an insufferable burning light, pain ripping apart my body.
The former games on our list didn't focus on reality too much, however Kolat puts a real-life ghost story at its forefront. The Polish adventure horror game by Imagine Pro takes place in 1959 in the Ural Mountains and features a real-life mystery that has not been explained to this day. The game's protagonist tries to trace a group of 9 scientists who went missing on a mountain expedition in February of 1959. At one night, something tore the scientists' tents from the inside and their bodies were later found dead, presumably from hypothermia. However, for some scientists, the cause of death was different. One of them died from brain damage, but with the skull perfectly intact, while one female scientist had her tongue pulled out. The screenwriters decided to add some paranormal elements to the incident to explain the mystery, and to be perfectly honest, it works very well. Kolat serves as an excellent example of how you can ground a story in a real-life mystery and make it much more engaging for the player. We strongly recommend you give this one a try if you haven't already. The game is quite chilly, no pun intended.
What is this? What's going on here?
Silent Hill is one of the most adored horror series out there, and critics consider the second game in the series to be a masterpiece. It might be surprising to you, but there's a certain town in the real world that's similar to Silent Hill. Of course, in this second Silent Hill there are no monsters, alternate dimensions, and ghosts of murdered wives. The game shares a striking resemblance to the ghost town of Centralia in Pennsylvania. Back in 1856, it was discovered that there were rich reserves of coal under Centralia, and so mining began. In its heyday, the town had around 3,000 people living in it, but fire in the mine in the year of 1963 changed all of that. In an accident, a fire started in the mine, and due to its dangerous nature, it couldn't have been put out. Soon after, the ground started to crack, and streets were covered in toxic fumes that made the entire place appear foggy and forced most of the locals to move out. The movie, based on the first game, plays around with the idea a bit, making a mine fire the reason for the town's fog. While only around a dozen people live in Centralia now, it became a tourist spot, not only for the game's fans, but also for those wanting to see the phenomenon of the cracked streets and fumes coming out of the holes in the ground. According to Konami, they had no idea about the town where they were making the game, but the resemblance is too uncanny. However, that's a mystery for a different day. The video game world is still experimenting with the idea of a story based on true events. Most of the titles on our list are indie titles that only take a handful of facts into account. However, the trend might become more popular in the coming years, as games don't have to rely on cheap thrills like blockbuster horror flicks. If you haven't already given those games a chance, be sure that you do, and I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.